So this is the session, the Telco position on AI regulation and ethics. So we have Lord Chris Holmes, member of the UK House of Lords here. Chris, for those of you who were here last year, Chris was with us here for a chat as well last year, but an awful lot has happened between now and then. But just a quick background. Chris is an advocate for the potential of technology in a lot of different ways. His interest and expertise is heavily focused on understanding how technologies can serve everybody. So inclusivity, very important here, and enablement. Chris, do you want to just give a little bit more background to yourself before we start the discussion?
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, Ray. Great to be back here at Telcos and AI. For any of you who were here last year, I'm going to say absolutely a completely different presentation to then, so it's all good. So no worries on that front. But because continuity and certainty and consistency is important, it's the same dog. So mainly I'm in Parliament very much looking at all the ways we can deploy these, if you will, new technologies for public, private, social, common good, really. So AIs for sure, but also distributed ledger technology, all the elements when we bring sensors into the mix. And worth looking at all of these technologies in isolation, but things get really interesting when we start to look at potential solutions where we bring in combination and technologies in concert with one another. So that's pretty much the mission that I continue to be on. That's also the same as last year.
Okay, so before we get into some of the specifics of what's happened in the past year, if we can just take a high-level view to start and look at what the major developments have been that have impacted your views on AI regulation in the past year. Do you think we have more clarity on what needs to be done or greater complexity?
I think some and some, as is often the answer to that kind of question. We've had the passage of the EU AI Act now. It's almost 1,000 pages. I've read them all, so you don't have to.
Thank you.
And it's prescriptive, so there's a sense that there's clarity in that jurisdiction, but it's also complex because it emanates from both jurisprudence around fundamental rights and product safety and tries to combine all of that in one act. And it also has the issue of Gen AI arriving partway through the legislative process. So complicated there. In the UK, a continuation, but with some increased complexity. So we had the previous government, remember them? They were very much wait and see. The then opposition were suggesting that they would be looking to legislate in relatively short order. Since coming into office, they've largely fallen into the wait and see camp. There's some sense that there'll be a specific AI bill coming through at some point, largely aimed at, for subtext, West Coast American large tech, really. But it's wait and see plus, really, because another element which has come into the mix just recently is their sense of waiting and seeing as to what happens with the new incumbent to the White House. So summing all of that up, what we need to have in the UK is more action with more pace and more clarity, but with connectivity and understanding of what's happening in the EU, in the US, and other key markets that we obviously highly connected with.
Okay. And do you get the sense that there's a greater understanding of the potential use and implications of the use of AI tools, not only in government and in legal circles, but in general with the people that you interact with?
I think there's a lot of column inches written on this stuff. There's a lot of conversations, more than 12 months ago for sure. And that's why it's a shame that there isn't more legislation and regulation in this space, because that would be additive and helpful and would show leadership. And as we all know, right side regulation, good for investment, good for innovation, good for citizen, good for consumer. We all know bad regulation, and there's plenty of that out there, but that's bad regulation. It doesn't mean that regulation is bad. And we're already seeing increasing number of use cases, as was mentioned in the previous panel. If you come across anybody at the top of an organization who says there's not AI currently in our business, well, that person needs to go around the shop and discover that people are often using these LLMs without any sense necessarily of protocols around it or what data they're putting into those LLMs and the consequence of doing it. So really, to your initial question, much more need for clarity around the conversations to enable that sense of comfort and increasing confidence for everybody, really, be they in a business, an individual citizen, to understand more as to how potentially some of these AI can help, but also to be cognizant of a broader level of understanding.
Okay. Can you just tell us about your AI regulation bill, which you brought to the House of Lords earlier this year, and what came out of that process and what your aim was with that?
Sure, and I had first reading of the bill only just over a year ago, and I managed to get it through all stages of the parliamentary process in the House of Lords, and it was all set to go in the House of Commons, and then somebody decided it was a good idea to call a general election. I don't know if anybody knows how that turned out. But fundamentally, what I was getting at, as I mentioned earlier, the EU AI Act, highly prescriptive, almost 1,000 pages. My bill, 9 clauses, principles focused. So to look at that in the first instance, do we want to go prescription? Do we want to go principles based on it? So really looking at how we can put in place concepts such as an AI authority. And for that, don't think huge, behemathic, do-it-all AI regulator. Think small, nimble, agile, crucially horizontally focused regulator that can be the custodian of the principles, that can be the centre of expertise, and that can really assist all our existing regulators, such as Ofcom, who have got so much, as we all know, to do right now. Just on the talent point alone, this is one small fraction of it, but the talent point, at the moment, we all know there's a tremendous talent shortage for data scientists, AI experts, and we've got our regulators currently competing for that talent. So say Ofgem gets that particular data scientist and Ofcom doesn't. Well, how does that benefit the UK? How does that benefit our economy? How does that benefit consumers? It doesn't at all. If you could have the expertise in the AI authority available to all of our regulators, that would seem to make sense. Then flowing through a number of other principles. And again, probably nodding back to the previous panel, I've always said, for me, the most important provision, the most important clause in the bill is that relates to public trust and public engagement. Because no matter how good the technology is, no matter how good the marketing around that technology is, if we don't have public trust and public engagement, then most likely the outcome will be that people will choose to be 1 or 2 steps back. So they won't be able to avail themselves of the benefits, but they will certainly be saddled with the burdens. But the great good news is we know how to do this. What could be more scientific than bringing human life into being in a laboratory test tube, i.e. IVF? Why is it now seen as not only a positive part of our society, but blended into the background? Because a fantastic colleague of mine, the late, great Baroness Warnock, took the Warnock Commission up and down the country and did that public engagement. What were people's thoughts? What were their fears around that then leading edge technology? Where did they think the perimeter should be drawn? Hence, we should take the confidence. We know what we need to do to make a success of that. And that is why we shouldn't be stuck in this constant repeat until wait and see loop. We should act, and the time for action is overdue.
Okay, great example. Now, of course, once the new UK government did come in, They did bring with them an AI bill that was introduced in the King's speech in July. Do you see that bill as a positive development, and is it enough to get the ball rolling, as it were, for UK AI regulation?
What's interesting, just a slight delicate amendment to that, they said they were going to bring forward a bill, and there was one line of text in the King's speech about a bill, but bill on AI is yet to be seen. It's still very much the ghost of Christmas yet to come. That was a bit topical, wasn't it? Look at that. I didn't use that in a summer presentation, I promise. So there was a lot of talk about it. And as I say, when Labour were in opposition, they were very positive about the provisions in my bill and the principles underpinning them. But since then, as I say, they've morphed into that wait and see approach. So as much as one can know, there'll be a consultation at some stage in the new year. And as we all know in political language, the new year in due course at some stage in the future can be perhaps undefined stretches of time, but a consultation in the new year. And then this bill that I mentioned around specifically large foundational models. But as I said, the only way we're going to make the success of this that we can is if we think cross-economy, cross-sector, cross-society, horizontal approach. Because what you would want if you're an innovator, an investor, a citizen, a consumer, you would want to know that wherever you bump up against AI, be it in telcos, be it in buying your weekly shopping, whatever environment, what would you want? You would want clarity, consistency, coherence, and the certainty that comes from that. And that will only come if you take a horizontal, cross-sector, cross-economy approach, rather than doing a specific bill on large foundational models and then saying beyond that, it's really up to each individual sector and each individual regulator to determine how they're going to approach this.
Okay. So what would you like to see happen next, and what can sectors like telecom do to help deliver what you think we need in terms of this kind of the horizontal approach?
I think some of the greatest words have happened a long time ago, and I always find it incredibly appealing. E.M. Forster, only connect. I mean, I'm amazed that a telco hasn't used that as their advertising campaign, really. And if they do now, it's mine, and I have IP around it, and connect really, and connect up and down the telco supply chain, but crucially horizontally with clients as well, because only by having this consistency of message and consistency of want and having those discussions have we got a chance of having this sense of a coherent approach from the UK and tying into those principles on this point specifically, both in terms of the technology and in terms of the regulation, really holding true to that whole critical concept, that critical principle of interoperability.
Okay. And internationally, do you see any sort of good examples, countries setting good examples of how things could be in the UK and other countries? Are there trendsetters in terms of AI regulation?
Certainly in terms of where we've seen the most action, that's in the EU, first mover and the largest piece of legislation. If you think about that spectrum, as I described at the outset, of prescription to principles, if you will, it's more complex than that, but why not think of it in those terms? That's very much at the end of prescription. If you look at what's happening in APAC, there are some very interesting examples there, not least in the couple of AI acts that China have passed. It's worth looking at those and looking at elements that could be of use in other jurisdictions. The United States, less so. We had the executive order a while ago. There's been some attempts at some state level legislation, such as that in California in July, which didn't get through. I don't think we should be overly looking and waiting for the states to act to then follow. I think we can put ourselves in the optimal position if we focus on one of the greatest assets that we have. So we have a fabulous telco sector, a fabulous financial services ecosystem. We have a stunning higher education system. But above all of that, and running through every element, when we get it right, the great good fortune, the unbelievable gift of English common law. 80% of trade done in English common law. Why wouldn't we seek to connect with all of our friends right around those common law jurisdictions and seek to do something which has that seamless adaptability, agility, and interoperability through that wonderful common law community?
Okay. Chris, I think that's a great point to end on, a very positive point, and something that hopefully people here in the room can take away back to their companies. Thank you very much for joining us again this year. Great insights. I'll give you a round of applause for Chris. Thank you.